So, where was I? Yeah, Eric Johnson. He had been sensitive his whole life, and then he became more reactive and sensitive after this outbreak. He managed to go to the desert and get very, very clear from mold to the extent that he noticed it more, but it hurt him less. This is called unmasking, sort of like not eating gluten and then reintroducing it to see if it triggers you. And he actually did something sort of extraordinary. After he did this desert experiment and started improving and also started becoming more sensitive, he went back into the house that he got sick in and took a mold expert in there, and he found the specific mold colony in the house, managed to locate the specific location of it in the house, and he got a sample of that and got the mold expert to remove it and I think culture it, and then just give him a sample of it, and it was Stachybotrys tartarum. And he took that to the desert and did proximity experiments to see how close he could get. Like I was saying, Eric did these proximity experiments with actually finding a culture of finding a colony of Stachybotrys and having it cultured from the house that he was in when he got sick during the Tahoe outbreak. But he also identified that there was something in the outside air that was making him sick, and that if he avoided certain areas in Tahoe, he could recover. And he actually walked in a grid pattern and made a map of Incline Village and the bad zones that he found reliable. And the interesting thing is that map also correlated somewhat to a solvent spill that was reported and not fully cleaned up in the Tahoe around the time of the Tahoe outbreak. But, I mean, you might be saying that's still just one person, although there are also the teachers in Truckee that complained of something in that room that was making them sick. As I understand it, there were more than just Eric who were sickened by mold in that outbreak, but many of them didn't manage to fully recover, and also, I think very basic epidemiology wasn't done and was neglected by both the CDC and even the somewhat fairly caring doctors that believed in this illness. They were chasing viruses, so they were really not interested in there being a geographic pattern to the outbreaks. They never really found the root cause. I think Paul Cheney and Peterson are actually still in practice, but haven't managed to cure a ton of patients. So I would be questioning, whether they should go back to the drawing board and look at a different pattern to the outbreaks and not just focus on the infectious agent. Because as we know from research, mold and mycotoxins can be immunosuppressive, and many environmental toxins can be immunosuppressive in a way that might allow for a virus to spread that is otherwise commonly dealt with by the immune system. But as far as it being only a few anecdotes, I mean, there was an outbreak that had a strange geographic pattern. There are actually several outbreaks that fit this criteria. I would say the Royal Free ME outbreak in the 1950s, I believe, fits this pattern of an outbreak that only spreads within a certain area. This has been called This has been explained by what is called the dual factor theory of ME/CFS, that there has to be some combination of an immunosuppressive agent, often an environmental toxin, and an infectious agent, and that this explains the geographic clusters of outbreaks. The physician David Bell described a similar outbreak that happened mostly among children, and they all got sick in this same school. So how many people have this as a component of their illness? Well, I don't think any reporting on this has or could be reliable, as there are no really reliable tests for mold and mycotoxins, and we don't even know for sure we're looking for mold and mycotoxins. As Eric Johnson has pointed out, there might be some combination of mold and pathogenic and industrial pollution that causes the mold to become more pathogenic. We don't even know what that would look like under mass spectrometry or like in the lab. Even if there were tests for mold and mycotoxins that were reliable, and there really aren't. So that's one reason any testing so far might be unreliable. And then if you're relying on reported triggers for onset, yes, most people remember a viral or bacterial infection, but like I said, that's not zero sum with mold by any means. A lot of the infections, like I got Lyme as my trigger, that clears up in 75% of people who are treated for it don't have lingering symptoms. So what's with the remaining 25%? Do they have some genetic predisposition? I'm not sure that there's any research that suggests that. So my thought is maybe the remaining 25% of people have some kind of environmental exposure that causes increased inflammation, and there's already probably an increased tendency for inflammation after an infection. There's research linking infections to increased mast cell activation, and maybe an overactive immune response. So it would be unreliable to just rely. I don't think good data to just rely on self-reported triggers for onset. Many people would have no idea if they're exposed to an environmental toxin. I personally didn't really consider that a possibility for the first 3 years that I was ill, for the most part. I thought, I had Lyme, and then I just kind of got mysteriously worse even after the initial treatment helped some. For most people, they have to actually, it's not intuitive, it's counterintuitive. They have to get free of their living space and belongings into pristine air to unmask, and then come back to their living space to see if they react. There's no real easy test. You don't have to have visible mold to react. And so that would be another reason why I would think self-reporting of triggers is unreliable, especially with regard to assessing what percentage of the patient population has environmental triggers. So we have methods so far that I think have been unreliable for gauging the percentage of the patient population that is affected by this. But what we do have is some volume of anecdote, and I would say that there are at least tens of thousands of people actively pursuing this path of mold avoidance, which is probably a much smaller number than the percentage of people affected by environmental toxins. But if you want, the experiment run of whether this affects people, tens of thousands of people are doing it and getting positive results.